Well, hello and welcome to you all. It's wonderful to have so many of you with us to consider how treatments for COVID-19 can help on the road to recovery. My name is Sue Saville. I'm a former medical correspondent at Britain's ITV News, and I'm delighted to be here to guide you through our discussions today. We have a fantastic panel of experts for you today. They are ready to take your questions too, so please do submit them using the Q&A function on the screen there. We're going to take questions throughout our discussions, so please get those ready and don't be shy. We've got a great panel for you to raise your questions with. So just think about this. Instead of taking 10 years to get a new medicine to market, the pharmaceutical industry had vaccines for SARS-CoV-2 ready in just 10 months. And now over 2 billion doses have already been administered worldwide. So the industry, the next step, is really working around the clock to find treatments for COVID-19. And the idea is that these will mitigate the severity of the illness. They'll free up capacity in hospitals, in the intensive care units. They'll treat what is becoming known as long COVID. And of course, ultimately, the treatments will save lives. There are nearly 3,000 trials already underway for novel treatments. There are 61 therapeutic candidates in place in the later stages of development. And these include things like antivirals, monoclonal antibodies, antihypertensives, anti-inflammatories, immune modulators, antithrombotics, and steroids. So just as there was a race to develop vaccines, now there's a race to get treatments out there. Well, what's the latest? Where have we got to? We'll find out from our excellent panel, and they'll tell us how it is soon to get these treatments to patients. Let me introduce to you our distinguished panel. We have Pierre Delsaux, who is the Deputy Director General of DG Santé at the European Commission. We have Jenny Camaradou, a patient expert and a fellow of the EUPATI patient group. Massimiliano Di Domenico is the current Vice President for Communications, Government Affairs and Market Access for Europe at GSK. And we have Professor Michel Goldman, President of the Institute for Interdisciplinary Innovation in Healthcare at the Université Libre de Bruxelles at Belgium, and the former Executive Director of IMI, the Innovative Medicines Initiative, and Nathalie Moll, Director General of EFPIA, who are hosting this event. Welcome to you all. We've got an hour. It's a tight time today. Let's get straight into it. I want to hear from you all why you think it's so important that we focus now on treating COVID, not just preventing it with vaccines. Pierre Delsaux, over to you first.
Thank you very much, Sue, and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. And one day, I hope, because of treatment and because of vaccine, we'll be able to have a physical meeting, because actually I've never physically met many of you, none of you actually. That's quite depressing to a certain extent. Maybe one point also, what you say about the vaccine, it's true that industry has been extremely effective in delivering new vaccines very quickly. But let's not forget also that the technology used, mRNA messenger, was actually financed already some time ago, a long time ago, through Horizon 2020 at that time. So it's not coming out of the blue. It's also because we invested in research a long time ago that this investment in research finally have led to this progress on vaccines. And again, I'm not denying the fact that industry has done a great job in a few months' time. Now, on your questions on therapeutics, why do we need therapeutics? First of all, because we talk about vaccines, not everybody is vaccinated today. Not 100% population is vaccinated, and it will take time before everybody is being vaccinated. And we know also that certainly in some places there is vaccine hesitancy, which might conduct us to have some part of the population not being vaccinated. So that's one element which I believe is important. So the disease is not gone. The disease might still be there despite the fact that you have vaccines, because not everybody will be vaccinated. Second element, we don't know what will be the situation about the variants. Of course, we know that for the moment, the current vaccines are effective against the known variants, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So again, in this context, having the appropriate therapeutics, which might help us to find when you have people who are sick because of the COVID new variant, is also extremely important. And finally, my last point would be simply B, we need to have the more diversified type of tools against the disease. So vaccines is one response, therapeutics is another response. Other measures are also important. So let's try to combine all our tools in our power to make sure that we really protect our population. And I would stop here at this stage.
Yeah, thank you. Jenny, why do you think it's so important to develop these treatments now?
I think vaccinations are wonderful, but viruses mutate and there'll always be a margin of error. And there's a considerable disease burden on patients that are both hospitalized and non-hospitalized. We need to not only save lives, but prevent long-term disability. And I mean, this virus is here to stay. As Pierre said, we need to keep a step ahead of it.
Great, thank you. Massimiliano, what's your take?
Yes, thank you, Sue. Thank you very much. A great being part of this top quality panel today. So I think vaccines definitely have played and are playing a crucial role to take us all out of this pandemic. And I'm sure that, like me, many of you have been looking forward to getting vaccinated. But I strongly believe that we need both vaccines and therapeutics and any other tool that we can use to tackle this pandemic, to save life, to help patients, to avoid pressure on healthcare structures, and ultimately to sustain the lifting of restrictions, the reopening of the economies, and a successful transition out of this pandemic phase. I think treatments are essential for all those who are waiting to be vaccinated, all those who cannot be vaccinated, all those who will, for any reason, will not be vaccinated, and also in the event of a further variation of the virus, especially for the patients at risk. So in few words, I think monoclonal antibodies together with vaccine can be at the moment the most effective and immediate tool to control the virus spread and to tackle any outbreak.
Thank you. We'll talk further about the specifics of what's in the pipeline. But Michel, why do you think treatments are so important?
I think that now is the time to indeed invest more in treatments. Why? Because some people are not yet vaccinated, but even among those who are vaccinated, quite a significant number are not responding the right way to vaccines. So those are the people with some type of cancers, of other hematological diseases, transplanted patients. Those patients first are extremely vulnerable to the most severe forms of the disease. And second, a number of them are not responding to vaccines. So now is the time to take care of these patients, to protect them. And the only strategy that can work in this type of patients is indeed to treat them.
Thank you. Nathalie, we won't rest, it says behind you.
Big font as well.
And the pharmaceutical industry isn't resting. So why now this focus on prevention? Why is this the next step and so important?
Well, I'm going to try not to repeat what everybody else said. So of course, I agree with all those things. I mean, for COVID, we need the full arsenal, right? So since the beginning, we've been working on detecting, treating, looking for a vaccine. And that race on treatments actually started even before, at the same time as we were looking for vaccines, because we were looking to free up capacity in intensive care units. We were looking to treat patients living, with COVID-19, with the long impacts of COVID-19. And we've seen the impact it has had. And we really think that this is key also in Europe to be able to address and manage any next waves coming up. And especially also, as Michel mentioned, either for those who are not responding well to vaccination or for those who cannot get vaccinated for health reasons, we really need to be able to have the broad spectrum of COVID management to come out from under that cloud and get hold of our lives again, as Massimiliano mentioned.
Thank you. And representing the pharmaceutical industry broadly there, Nathalie, what would you say is the sense of urgency and commitment then across the industry to develop the therapies? I'm interested in what's already coming through, what might be in the pipeline. Are you, as an industry, repurposing medicines that are already out there or working on innovative novel treatments?
Well, thanks, Sue. In fact, I remember that on the 1st of April of last year, we published our commitment. It was a 12-point commitment, and the first thing was around research and looking into all our databases to see what we could use to produce vaccines, but also very much so what we could use for diagnostics and for treatments. And a lot of the 3,000 clinical trials that you mentioned that are looking into therapeutics, many of them are already repurposed medicines that were used for something else. But when we look through databases and we match them with the virus, it looked like they could be a good fit. And then some are completely new candidates that have been developed from scratch. You know, there are monoclonal antibodies, as Massimiliano mentioned, antivirals, antihypertensives, anti-inflammatory immunomodulators, because everybody seems to have quite different reactions to COVID. It's not like a blanket reaction. So there are lots of different things to be treated. And I really think that the Commission's COVID-19 therapeutics plan is super important, and that partnership that we have together, because it goes from bench to bedside. It's not just about research, it's about the whole pathway. And I think that's very, very important to make sure that we go as quickly as possible. We saw how effective the vaccine strategy was. Commission was extremely quick to develop a therapeutics vaccine as well. And I think that has been really important. So on our side, as you mentioned, leveraging our technologies, our pipelines, our portfolios, but also building partnerships between companies. You've seen it on vaccines, but it's happening also on therapeutics. It's not just happening on the vaccine side, that we work with one another to try and do better. And even when we repurpose, we still have to invest a substantial amount of money to make sure that those medicines work for COVID and are successful. So I think it really demonstrates COVID is the most incredible learning experience for all of us on many, you know, personally as well as work-wise. And I'm so impressed by an industry that indeed doesn't rest and is not just looking at one area, but the whole stretch of what we can do to manage COVID-19.
Thank you. So picking up on a couple of those points there, you talk about the whole pathway and having to follow that through. So Massimiliano, from a specific industry perspective, then how does what you're working on, you mentioned monoclonal antibodies, how does that play into the whole pathway?
Yes, first of all, I couldn't agree more with what Nathalie just said. One of the biggest learning that we got from this pandemic situation has been the importance and the need to work together, to work in partnership. Everything that we achieved has been to tackle this pandemic has been thanks to this close cooperation, which has been within the industry, cross geographies, where all the actors involved, the regulators, the scientific community, patients, they all gave their best to make sure that we achieved what we achieved so far. I think clearly we are all in agreement that vaccines are critical, but not the only solutions. And that's for a number of reasons. Many of them we already touched on. You know, vaccine hesitancy can play a role. The continuous spread will extend the burden on healthcare systems. The virus is evolving. And also, let's not underestimate the issue of different seasons in opposite hemisphere. This will support the variant circulation and will make it even harder to control the infection cycle. So how can we work together to make sure that we tackle all of these issues? Again, I think it's the biggest part of this is working in partnership. And we as GSK are very involved in a number of very important partnerships. The most important one on the therapeutic front is a partnership that we have been we put in place already for a while with Vir Biotechnology. And this was fully focused to develop new monoclonal antibodies. One of these monoclonal antibodies that we have developed together, in particular, has resulted in an 85% reduction in the risk of hospitalization and death in high-risk adults. And this monoclonal antibody has received the authorization from the FDA for emergency use for treatment of mild to moderate COVID-19 in high-risk adults and pediatric patients. Has also received a positive opinion from the EMA in May. We are on track for the EMA conditional marketing authorization by the fall. And most important, it's very important to consider that this specific monoclonal antibody has maintained activity against all variants of interest and concerns. Therefore, it's a great weapon to control the virus spread and to tackle outbreaks. Can you imagine what this means for the patients, for the family, for the health system, for the structures, and to tackle the potential outbreaks and to control the spread of this virus? I mean, this is something that we are really, really focusing on, and we are making all the effort possible to make it available as soon as possible to all eligible patients.
Thank you. I'd like to bring Michel in here for a take on that. And there's one of the questions that's come in. Perhaps this I could direct to you, Michel. Clara asks, among the 61 candidates at last stage, what are the therapeutic classes, antivirals, monoclonal antibodies, and so on? And from these, how many are targeted to the early stages, mild to moderate outpatient setting, or for patients in the ICU hospital, severe cases? Do you have a knowledge of that, Michel?
Yes, I would like to emphasize that at this time point, where at least in some countries, the pandemic seems not under control, but at least we reduce the number of the most severe cases. What we have to do now is to prevent those who are vulnerable to the severe cases to develop the severe forms of the disease. And it's there that the monoclonal antibodies at this time point are the most promising weapons. As you know, they received some emergency use authorization in the US, and we hope to have conditional authorization in Europe soon. The point I would like to make is that it's really very nice to see that the HERA incubator that Pierre Delsaux is setting up in Europe as priorities. First, the knowledge about variants, and second, the development of therapeutics. It's really important to consider both to make sure that our antibodies are active against the different variants, which seems to be the case. The point is that Europe has historically been at the forefront of this type of treatments. And I think it's very important that we make sure through HERA and other instruments that the late stage developments are also done in Europe. And indeed, the European Commission supports many investigators programs, including the one Massimiliano was elaborating on. But we must acknowledge that the late phase development are mainly taking place in the US, and we really hope that Europe will in a way recover its leadership in the field.
That's a really good point. Pierre, would you like to pick up on that then? How can Europe stay in the lead, get those late stages here? The scientists are in Europe, but are they leaving? Are they going to the US? You've got the HERA incubator. Tell us what you're doing to make sure that innovation, technology, capabilities stay in Europe.
It's a very important point, of course, because it's very well to develop new therapeutics, new research, and new innovation. But it's clear we also want these therapeutics to be developed in Europe and to be produced in Europe. Because again, coming back to the question of the vaccines, you've seen that the fact that we don't get access to vaccines on the European grounds and don't have all the ingredients on the European grounds was a problem. So having some kind of autonomy is extremely important in this context. That's the first message. Second message, what do we do? Again, as it has been mentioned by Nathalie, we have adopted this therapeutic strategy. And what do we want to do with the therapeutic strategy is basically trying to identify certain drugs, certain treatments, which could be of interest, which could be actually produced very quickly in Europe. And we believe this is something which is important. And we want to help in this process. We want to put resources, we want to put money, we want to see where, we could go to joint procurement, maybe possibly to advanced purchase agreement. And the point is also that we believe it's important we work this as a partnership, because to come back to the point which has been mentioned by Massimiliano and also by Nathalie, it's important we are all together in this. It's all member states, the European Commission, and industry. So it's not, if we are divided, we know one thing, that the fear that we all have that, those technologies, the developments will take place elsewhere than in Europe is too important. One last aspect also, which I did not mention in my intervention, which I believe is important. Of course, we are focusing on Europe, but let's not forget the rest of the world. So we need also to develop therapeutics, treatments, and drugs, which also could be useful in other parts of the world. Because again, it's one thing to develop and to produce in Europe, but let's not forget nobody will be safe, to use a slogan, but it's a very important slogan. Nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. So we need also to take into account the rest of the world in this context.
Indeed. And Jenny, would you like to pick up on that about the value to patients in Europe and indeed globally, what difference these treatments might make to patients around the world?
Well, I think there isn't a bit of the body that isn't affected in COVID, and we need to sort of, I'm very pleased to see the 6th of May, 123 million emergency funding the EU has put aside to look at stratification and phenotyping, because we really need to understand the etiology of what causes long haul effects far more by actually considering the considerable disease burden that people that were not hospitalized are also having symptoms up to 13 months later. And I think it's key that we take away lessons that we've learned from other disease areas. So if we look at the cancer market access patients or rare disease patients, it's great to see that the Commission has focused on access and affordability as part of its future strategy. But I think we're in it for the long haul. We you know, if somebody says to me, we have developed a multi-specific antibody approach, a Streptococcal-based approach, that's great, but ultimately as a patient, I want to be able to take a pill that's going to allow me to return back to work, that's going to give me a semblance of glimmer of my pre-pandemic life. And we cannot underestimate the considerable degrees of social isolation and mental health problems and anxiety that patients are facing, either as a result of interrupted treatment or actually, you know, not being able to lead their life in a normal way.
Thank you very much. And let's turn now to some of the more questions coming in. Thank you very much for sending in the questions. Andrew sends in a question saying the EC intends to draw up a portfolio of the 10 potential COVID-19 therapeutics this summer, including the 5 most promising. What criteria should the Commission be using to choose these? What scrutiny process should be designed to make sure that the right ones are prioritized? Is that one for you, Michel?
Well, I think that really in Europe, we have many of the world leaders in the field. So I know that the European Commission is consulting these top scientists, and clearly we have to use first scientific criteria for the selection. And second, we have to make sure, as Pierre Delsaux rightly said, that the products that we try to promote will indeed be accessible and affordable to patients and also to our governments.
Thank you. More questions come in. I'd like to put this to Pierre now about this and pick up on that priorities as well. Another question that ties in with that from Mauricio: does the EMA plan to set up a fast-track approval process? Does the EMA have a plan to set up a fast-track approval process for these treatments? Pierre, how are the priorities going to happen? How can this be fast-tracked?
First of all, I would like to follow up on what Michel Goldman has just said. First of all, those technologies, those therapeutics are being examined also by EMA, and EMA is a very, expert group of people. Let's be also proud of what we have. Sometimes we like always to say, things are better outside of Europe, but EMA is really top-class people, top scientists, and they are doing a great job. So we should be proud of what they are doing. So they will be involved, of course, in the process of selecting those therapeutics. That's the first element. Second element for your information, probably you have not noticed it because it's, but still, we have decided as a commission to create a group of experts, scientists, which will help advise us on 2 aspects. First of all, in the context of ERA incubator for the variants, just to monitor the situation of the variants, and one needs to be done possibly with the adaptation of the vaccines, if needed, of course. And second aspect, those experts will also help us to basically assess what therapeutics could be supported by the Commission. So that's, and don't ask me the name of those experts. We've just decided the creation of the group. We have not yet the names of the experts, but those will play a very important role, because to come back to what Michel Goldman said, it's important also that we look at this from a scientific point of view, because clearly science is first. So science is first. Then second criteria, which is important for us, it's of course the capability to produce sufficiently and at affordable, in a way which is affordable for everybody. So of course, if we create a medicine which is very effective but cannot be produced enough and at a price which is acceptable, it's not something we want to support. And maybe last element also, which to come back also to one of the remarks which has been made by Jenny, which I believe is important, we should probably try to avoid to focus on only one kind of technologies of treatment. So we need to have maybe different platforms, just to see what's workable and what is going to work. So I believe those elements are important, well past to do things. One last aspect also, which I would like to make publicity for, we also realize that the question of production is important. And so we organized a matchmaking event on the 12th and 13th of July, and you are all invited. The idea is also to look at the production capacities and the bottlenecks and so on with respect to therapeutics in Europe, because that's something which is important also. You know, again, science is important, but as we say, you need to produce and you need to make sure that we produce at the right condition in Europe.
Well, let's bounce that one over to Nathalie then. Matchmaking event, you're invited, we're all invited to try to help this process get along. And Pierre mentioned there about access in the end. And of course, there's been such impressive speed of getting the vaccines to public. What's the industry going to do to keep up that momentum? Matchmaking, is that the answer?
I think really that the COVID therapeutic strategy is a super smart move, as I mentioned before. And the matchmaking like we had in vaccines is very important. It's a sort of bench to bedside. You're going research, development, innovation, scanning for candidates, access, swift approval, clinical trials, regulatory flexibility, the whole thing, supply chain. We've learned, right? We've learned how many, it takes a village. It doesn't even take a village. It takes a whole globe to get something approved when it comes to COVID. And hats off to the Commission for being so fast on the mark and saying, okay, we're doing vaccines, now we're doing therapeutics. There was very little time between the two. And so anything that can be done, I think, is being done from their side and together with us. And Pierre, you mentioned partnership, Massimiliano, you mentioned partnership, Michel, everybody. You know, for us, of course, innovation only matters if it reaches patients. If we'd had all these vaccines and nobody was vaccinated, it's nice in theory, but it's a disaster. And I'm smiling, but, you know, COVID is serious, and we've lost so many lives to COVID, and we've had so many impacts on patients. So we have, just as for any medicine, we have this shared commitment to ensure access, to ensure safe and efficacious medicines that have been tested in a first-class regulatory system and no corners are cut. I think this is important also for therapeutics. We mentioned it a lot for vaccines, but it's just as important for any medicine. And we need to reduce that. We need to reduce that any delays that we can have, improve the availability. We did it on treatment. We did it on vaccines. In our commitment that I mentioned, the 1st of April of last year, Sue, it wasn't limited to vaccines. It was limited to, it was for everything. We committed to make sure that we would work with governments to ensure the fastest possible access of our products. As a whole, I think, together with the Commission and other stakeholders, we're looking at the barriers to access, availability, and affordability. That's what we need to do. Today, we need to look at the barriers. We've published a number of reports and that we've discussed with several policymakers at the highest level. We did it last year. We did it again this year. I think what we really need to do is look at what the situation on access is globally. We can act at European level, but you can also look at globally and then agree on what the root causes are, and there are very many root causes, and at that point co-create solutions. Because today we have some, you know, words that float around, but in fact this is about getting medicines to patients. So words floating around is not serious enough to be dealt with. We really need to build a very clear picture of the access to medicine landscape, develop an evidence based on a common understanding of the root causes, and then co-create solutions. And we've seen with vaccines, we've seen that we can do it. You know, we can really do it and do it very quickly. And HTA, European HTA, Pierre, is one great first step. Joint clinical assessment. The science should be the same for everybody, and that would speed up already a lot. But also novel pricing and payment models. You know, there are lots of countries using them for different products. Why not apply them also for COVID-19 therapeutics? Share a little bit more best practices and learn as COVID-19 keeps teaching us.
Thank you. So let's bring frontline industry expert in there, Massimiliano. There's a lot there. There's a lot in there. There's a question come in from Dirk, which you might like to take, Massimiliano. Yes, a lot of therapeutics are tested, but are clinical trials running in primary care or with a focus to implement the therapy in an outpatient setting? With the context of everything that Nathalie's put there about the push that you're giving, can you respond to Dirk's question there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, very interesting question. And before answering the question, and I will in a second, let me also acknowledge and recognize and thank the effort made by the European Commission, both on the COVID therapeutic strategy front, but also on the these very concrete examples like the matchmaking event to bring different actors together, again, to reinforce the concept of partnership to succeed all together for the ultimate benefits of the patient. So thank you very much for that. In reference to the questions that was raised, definitely there are different areas where COVID therapeutics can be leveraged, and on the recipe front is also an area where we are continuously making research and efforts. So that's an area that we are currently looking at. I would like also to add, just to close on this, Sue, please, if you allow me, I think one common denominator of many things that we are discussing so far is also the concept of innovation. I think, again, all the achievement of the industry together with all the other stakeholders have been achieved thanks to the strong innovation which is currently present in Europe. And I really think that innovation can trigger the scientific, the economic growth of this extremely important industry for Europe. And again, ultimately to support the benefit of the patients. But I think it's also very important to make sure that we all work together also, authorities, academia, the industry, the patients association, the scientific world, regulator, decision makers, we all work together to ensure that Europe continues to be a global leader on innovation. We are living in a very highly competitive environment, and there are many countries, US, India, China, who are competing to attract as much as possible innovation in this industry. So I think this is also another area where we should all keep the focus and we should all work together. Europe needs to be needs to continue to be a real center of excellence at global level when it comes to innovation in the pharma industry.
Thank you. And you talked there about innovation. The COVID Therapeutic Strategy launched on the 6th of May, as was mentioned, talks about having an innovation booster to try to bring things forward in this way. Pierre, there's a question coming in I'd like to put to you, which is from Daniel. Are you considering joint procurement for COVID treatments as done for vaccines to accelerate access? Is joint procurement part of the COVID-19 therapeutic strategy, Pierre?
Okay, first of all, let me come back to where we are on the therapeutic strategy. We announced that for the end of June, we will publish a list of the 10 most promising therapeutics. We are close to the end of June, so maybe you will see very quickly some kind of announcement on this, which I believe is important. Now, the second aspect, of course, is not just a question of identifying what exists and what will be developed. We need also to make sure that we, as we say, those products, those therapeutics will reach the patients, and we reach the member state and the patient at the end of the day, because we believe this is important. So it's clear that once we have identified those most promising therapeutics, we need to reflect what kind of mechanisms do we put into place to make sure that those therapeutics actually reach the patient. And based on the COVID experience, one of them was joint procurement. Joint procurement was sometimes difficult, sometimes complicated, but it was a very useful tool during the crisis. We had also the advanced purchase agreement, which went further, because it was clearly something more binding, I would say. But again, we are looking at what kind of mechanism we'll put into place. My only message is what we really want is to make sure that those therapeutics which are being identified as the most promising will reach the patient at the end of the day. And we'll find the appropriate mechanism with the member states to make sure that they reach the patient at the end of the day.
And Michel, would you like to pick up on that point that came in from Daniel about joint procurement? Do you see that as the strongest way forward?
It's an important component of the strategy. The other component is not forget science. I think it will be nice to see the most promising compounds, but we have also to prepare ourselves to the second generation of actually existing therapeutics. Antibodies are one example. What we need is a second generation of monoclonal, which are variant proof, which might work against any variant, either variant which are there or that will be there tomorrow. And these require research with a strong scientific background. The other point I would like to make, which is linked to this one, is that we need partnership, but we need the different partners able to move outside their usual comfort zone, which means to be able to take some level of risk and to move partnership one step further. In terms of clinical trials that were discussed, I think the Vaccelerate program within the HERA incubator is a very good example to bring together the different clinical trial sites to really move forward more rapidly. Obviously, we need industry taking some risk in investing, in new products without any guarantee that they will work. They did it with vaccine. They have also to do it now with therapeutics. And actually, I would like to come back to what was said about EMA. EMA, it's true, has been indeed wonderful in making sure that we go as fast as possible. And for this, I would say that they took some reasonable level of risk as compared to what they did in the past. And that's very important. And for me, the big question mark that I already expressed is whether the European Commission will be able to take the same type of attitude and perhaps to change a bit its usual mindset, which is, I would say, very often risk averse. And I think it's very important. And actually, with the HERA incubator, I think that we are in the good direction to indeed be able to do things differently from the past.
I think, Nathalie, you wanted to come in there. But I'd like to pick up some of those points you made there, Michel, with Jenny, because from the patient perspective, there's a lot of talk then about what's happening. There's all these steps, the therapeutic strategies there, the matchmaking events. There's an announcement coming up then. We're hearing end of June, it's very, very soon, to find out which are the ones that they're going to be targeting. What about the patient engagement in this, Jenny? Is there enough of the patient voice in all of this?
I believe that we need to try and find a neutral knowledge broker that can actually join the dots between all the stakeholders that have been mentioned so far in terms of industry, policy and academia. And I think that you need to get legitimacy and representativeness in the actual patient concerns that are voiced. So I would almost argue that if we look at the examples from the ERA-nets, we need a type of aggregator, objective aggregator entity that can voice everybody's concerns. And, organizations such as the European Patients Forum may be well positioned to do that. We also need to try to stratify and bring in differing patient voices that represent different disease areas that have been impacted by this. But I'm quite hopeful in the sense of when I look at the recovery trial in the UK or the WHO Solidarity trial, these are examples of how to do things better and faster. So I think, including digital solutions that have an evidence base, looking at how to, utilize and capitalize on integrated care, virtual wards, and that kind of type of thing is a key way to actually ensure that patients' concerns are sort of taken to the next level.
And Jenny, could I stay with you? Because a question's come in from Jana saying, how do you make sure that the patient experts can help in fighting misinformation, which of course we've seen with vaccines? If there are fears about treatments, if they seem to be novel, if there are concerns out there and there's so much misinformation out there, how can the patients help make sure that the information is valid and accurate?
Well, I think it's true that we are all experiencing a level of pandemic fatigue. And if I'm not mistaken, Reuters did a report earlier this year that showed that people that were pro-vaccine were more likely to be traditional media users as opposed to social media users in Europe that are of younger generation. But I think responsibility must be shared between all the member states, governments, the EU, but also social media giants that have a key role to play in dissemination of information. So yes, we need campaigns on transparency, accountability, but obviously communicating therapeutics developments to non-clinical audience is going to be a challenge anyway. And I would argue that if you can get patient experts that understand the nature of regulatory clinical affairs, they're able to leverage their patient community networks to actually share messages in a more translatable manner. But I also think it's important that we do not forget the vulnerable and marginalized communities that perhaps need a different approach. So we need to build trust. We need to have trusted community leaders that in the grassroots sort of communities that they can sort of reach to sort of ensure that everybody is on the same page.
And Nathalie, with the thoughts about the reach then for patients, the Europe's expecting to have 70% of adults double vaccinated by the summer. why then the need, why the urgency to get these treatments? Won't vaccination be enough?
Well, I think as was mentioned at the beginning, this virus, just like any virus, enjoys mutating, like any biological entity when it's in danger of not surviving. At the moment, I think the vaccines that we're seeing are quite effective against variants, but you have to have both vaccinations, so you can't be in the middle. And there's that. So there's also, of course, the non-vaccinated population, whether by choice or by availability or by health situation where it is actually not advisable for you to be vaccinated. And then there is, making sure that we have other options and that we can treat anybody who does get COVID and who has those. And I think there are various, there's long-term COVID, but there are lots of let's say complications for people who have had COVID and who need treatment to get back to a normal quality of life. So I think, again, that overall basket of options to deal with this virus that has put the whole world on its knees, but we're getting up, is extremely important. And also to be ready for anything else coming our way. It will have also taught us a lot of good lessons in how, if we have another pandemic, what we need to activate and how quickly and in what kind of partnerships, because Jenny, it was really interesting to hear what you were saying. There's a lot more that needs to be done to reach everybody. And I'm not sure we are putting, all the tools we need to do that simply because of the time that we've had to do it. But I think it's very important to consider those things.
And that word partnerships, Nathalie, it keeps coming up, partnerships, collaboration. Michel, you've worked with the IMI on partnerships in all sorts of different ways, whether it was Ebola or vaccine safety project. How do you see these partnerships and collaboration as being so important and that need to be embedded to take this forward, Michel?
I really think that on the issues we are discussing, patient voice, but I would say rather citizens' voice is essential. What we need is our citizens to be much more health savvy, to know much more about how to remain healthy, how to evaluate risk-benefit balance also on an individual basis. And this is something that people have to learn. And I think it's very important that in our education system, even in very young people, we make sure that these basic concepts, notions are indeed learned. And when I read all the discussions about vaccinations in young adolescents or even children, it's quite fascinating to see that, quite often the children themselves ask their parents to get their shots. So I think that there is a lot to be done targeting, I would say, the next generation to make sure that as part of being prepared to future pandemics, the fact that they know what health means is extremely important.
Thank you. A couple of hands are raised. I think Massimiliano, you would like to come in here.
Yes, I just would like to build on the last two questions, in particular the one to Nathalie on the need to have therapeutics together with vaccine to tackle this situation. I think another big learning we all got from this pandemic is the need to be well prepared on time and to avoid to tackle the situation when you are in the middle of a crisis. That's why I think it's important to be prepared with COVID therapeutics as another weapon to tackle this pandemic now, today. And we shouldn't wait until we are in a much more critical situation. And I can see already a very clear alarm, I have to say, coming from the UK, where I live, with this Delta variant, which is increasing the number of cases in a very worrying way. There were like 25,000 cases only yesterday, and 95% of these cases was originated from the Delta variants. So again, that's why I think we need to be prepared now, today, with all the weapons that we have available and not wait any longer.
Thank you, Jenny, and then Pierre, hands raised. Jenny, your points.
Just to agree with some of the comments the previous speakers have made, that we need to sort of think outside the box in terms of keeping, you know, forward thinking in terms of how to sort of manage this in sort of future variations. But also it's critical if we think of this as a syndemic that co-occurs with many communicable and non-communicable diseases, is actually a paradigm opportunity to create a shift in the way that we deliver better care for a lot of different patients that have unmet clinical needs that as of yet do not have solutions. So obviously, you know, building on previous research in the infectious disease fund, looking at other post-viral illnesses is critical, but I would also argue there are a lot of different other variations of long haul effects that impact lots of other different patients that still don't have treatments.
Okay, thanks. And Pierre, you'd like to make some points here.
No, thank you very much. First of all, we are still, of course, in the COVID crisis, and we need to fight against the COVID crisis with all the tools which are there. But we need also now to start quickly reflecting on what lessons can we learn from the COVID crisis. You know, what are we going to do better in the future? And again, I'm not going to make publicity for the document which the Commission has adopted, but you probably have seen it on the 10 lessons for the COVID crisis, which one aspect. But what I want to say, we need to take advantage, and I'm sorry to use this wording because that's not really appropriate, but we need to take advantage of the COVID crisis to be better prepared in the future, to be more resilient in the future. And I believe this is something which is extremely important. Otherwise, we are not going to be successful when there will be a new pandemic in the future. And unfortunately, there will be a new pandemic. So that's, of course, the role of HERA, what we want to establish. But again, I already said it in several occasions, but I believe it, you know, I was involved in the financial crisis. And in the financial crisis, a certain number of measures were taken following the financial crisis. And when you look at the banking sector in the current economic crisis, the banking sector was resilient simply because we took the appropriate measures after the financial crisis to make sure that we create a more resilient banking system in Europe. So they were, of course, affected like everybody, but not too much affected during this crisis. So to come back to health, I believe we really need also to learn the lessons of what we have done well, what we have done not so well, and to try to prepare us for the future, all of us together.
And I think we've got time for one last question. We've had some great questions coming in from the audience. Thank you very much. There's one here from Marcin. You all mentioned shared commitment to deliver treatment to patients and partnerships between the Commission, industry and regulators. What about responsibility? Does industry feel a burden of responsibility to make sure that citizens have access to the final products? Briefly, Massimiliano, and then briefly, Nathalie.
Yes, a very good point. You can have the best therapeutics in the world, but if they don't reach out to the final patient, you know, this doesn't help that much at all. So it's important that we all work again together in partnership to make sure that we facilitate the access in the shortest time possible. We have some ideas that we are currently discussing with some governments in Europe in order to help them to find solutions to speed up this process. And we are open to new potential cooperation in this area for sure. Responsibility is one of our core pillars, together with trust, responsibility, integrity, and the patient centricity. So responsibility is at the core of our activities on a daily basis.
Thank you, Nathalie.
Yeah, I was just
responsibility here.
No, but that's really good. Thanks, Massimiliano. I was actually typing to answer Marcin because I really wanted it to be out there also in writing. As I said before, and Massimiliano just said it, a treatment with no access is not a treatment, right? So it is absolutely our responsibility, but it's shared. We developed it, we invented it, maybe from some funds from Horizon 2020, where the original research was invented, as was mentioned earlier. But you know, there are our products and our responsibilities to make sure that they reach patients. But it's not only we can't do it alone. I mean, the causes of delayed access, we've analyzed them, we've published them. You can find them on our website. There are things like the start of market access assessment. When does that happen? Is it delayed? Duplicative evidence requirements, so the different countries ask you for different evidence, so that makes it even longer for you to access the market. Whether it's the pricing and reimbursement policies or the company decisions, there are really lots of different elements, and so we can't do it alone. It's not just like an iPhone or a phone that you develop and you sell. It's not like that. So it is a shared responsibility. For us, it's a necessity, because why would we ever develop a therapeutic if not to get it to patients? And it is a bit frustrating that it doesn't just depend on us to get it to the patient, but in that partnership, in the learning that we've had, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have lots of novel pricing and payment methods that are being used for different therapies because they work at different times or they're approved at different moments. We have some best practices that we can share and build on in partnership to get the medicines to patients as quickly as possible. I'll also try and type it.
Before I ask each of you sort of upsumming final thought, I'd just like to bounce that one over to Pierre quickly as well. That sense of responsibility at the European Commission level, do you feel that briefly, Pierre?
You know, to be very honest with you, I have the feeling that the European Commission has acted with a lot of sense of responsibility during the crisis. Let's not forget that without the vaccine strategy, you know, basically all member states working together with the European, under the leadership of the European Commission, we have been able to make sure to be in a situation where probably in July, 12 member states will have 70% of their population being vaccinated, which is quite impressive. And so let's look at the positive aspect. Of course, the crisis, because as Nathalie said, people have died, you know, have been sick, are still sick, have lost their jobs. So a lot of very nasty consequences. But at least the European response was a good one, because we have been able to work as Europe. And it was not obvious at the beginning of the crisis, but there was a sense of responsibility by the European Commission, by the member states too, that it was much preferable to work together and to try to find solutions together rather than working in isolation. If they had worked in isolation, we would simply not be there for the moment. And of course, industry and patient, everybody was played his part, of course, in this. But it's clear there was a sense of working together, which was important.
Gosh, thank you so much. We've had to romp through, and there's so many more things that we could ask about this and from the audience as well, I'm sure. But in the short time we've had, I'd like to just ask each of you, please, for a sort of final thought. What do you think's come out of this? What do you want to take forward as a thought about treatments? Jenny, could I come to you first?
I think my key message would be don't promise hope without concrete delivery, whether that's pertaining to access or actually getting something that, you know, gets stuck in a national reimbursement HTA sort of process. I mean, thinking of emerging data from Primary Care Association in Spain, 57% of people with long COVID are actually having autonomic neurological symptoms. Now, this happens to be a disease where I'm a patient advocate with the European Academy of Neurology, and it represents an unmet clinical need. There's actually no cure, no approved drug licensed in either EMA or FDA, and a considerable degree of disability that comes with it. And my American friends have taken part in clinical trials and been given immunotherapy, which is obviously not really an option, affordable option in Europe. So I think if something's good going to come out of this, it's the sort of ability to look at many different other disease areas that represent unmet clinical needs, that actually this process of expediation of doing innovation and bringing all the dots together can actually support patients in many different areas.
Thank you. Michel, your final thought briefly.
Well, I would say that as an European citizen, I would like to share my hope and in a way my optimism that Europe will be the place where the most efficient therapeutics will be developed and made accessible for, I would say, two reasons. First, we are excellent in science. And as you know, science is what will save us at the end. But also, I think that Europe is the place where we are in the best position to align the interests of citizens and patients, industry, governments. And we have this culture, and we have to move forward with this partnership that were discussed today. And I think that with several initiatives, including, of course, ERA, we are on the right track.
Great. And to Pierre, what about your final thoughts, please?
My final thought is basically the road is difficult. We have many obstacles, but let's be optimistic. We can make it if we work together, and we need to involve, you know, to go from science to patients. And we need to make sure there is, you know, a momentum going from science to patient, but all of us together, we can make it, because again, as Europeans, we have a lot of resources. And Michel has mentioned that many of them, we have a lot of resources. So let's be optimistic.
Very positive note. Massimiliano, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm very much along with the previous comments. And actually that was music to my ears, especially when I hear about Europe. So that's fantastic. The only thing that I would like to add is let's make sure we keep this partnership spirit with the patient at the heart of everything that we think and everything we do. and let's stress out the issue of timing. For me, timing is now. We don't need to be complacent. We can't wait. We need to act now. And I'm referring in particular to the COVID therapeutic area. Together, we will make it, I'm sure.
There's an urgency there. Lovely. Now, Nathalie, Moll, EFPIA brought this distinguished panel together. I'll leave the final thoughts and closing remarks with you just for the moment. Nathalie, what's your take on this?
Thank you, Sue, and really a big thank you to all our panelists for joining. I know how busy you all are, but we also know how important it is to communicate. And you saw how many questions, how many people are attending. It's important to get information out there because everything is going so fast. And that is crucial that it is going fast. I think the main learning for me is always when you have a common enemy, you come together. And it's been incredible the way we've come together to beat COVID or to try and beat COVID, to come out of under COVID. And I really hope we keep the learnings for that, not just now for the COVID therapeutics and to continue vaccine development, etc., but also in the future, that we take those lessons learned and we apply them to other areas where we want to go faster and we want to do better. As Pierre mentioned, the bench to bedside approach of the COVID therapeutic strategy is impressive. You know, all from COVID research all the way to joint procurement, financing, supply chains, everything. That's important. We've always in Europe tended to do a lot on research, and then we've lost out on the translational, or we've looked at pieces, you know, separately. And it cannot, if you want to go for speed, if you want to go for effectiveness, you have to do it together. You have to look at the whole from bench to bedside. And that's really, really important. From our side, we are fully committed, as we have been from the beginning. Our commitment of 2020, we didn't have to reissue it because it's the same. Beating COVID-19 is really about being prepared today for what we're doing now, but also for future pandemics, having those safe, effective vaccines around the world, not safe until everybody's safe, and treatments for the patients who need them. Really, it's been such a pleasure, and I've learned so much this morning. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Nathalie, thank you. And just lovely to touch on some of the comments that have been coming in, and thank you to the audience. A very nice comment saying a huge thanks to EFPIA for this great initiative. Together is a very powerful word. Mary says, thank you so much for this very useful and crucial, interesting discussion. So many points, as you say there, Nathalie, have been raised, so many very positives about the learnings, about what needs to be taken forward. What came through for me was this sense of urgency, this sense of commitment now. It's been so impressive how vaccinations got to market so quickly. There's now a momentum, and from everything you've been saying on this panel, that momentum can now go forward. The words partnerships, the words collaboration came up over and again. So it'll be very interesting to see how these are taken forward. I look forward to the developments that Pierre mentioned there, those matchmaking events as well, trying to tie this together so that various companies can come together to work on the therapeutics that are going to help mitigate this disease and indeed save lives. It's been a fascinating discussion. I just want to keep it going. There's so many more things it would be lovely to ask, but thank you so much to our great distinguished panel, to all the speakers. Thanks to EFPIA for bringing them together on this panel. Thanks to the audience for listening and for the great questions coming in. It's been my great pleasure to guide you through the discussions today. Thank you all. Goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.